Exactly 13 minutes past the top of the hour. We continue apace with the day's conversation. Time for our last conversation this Wednesday morning. Our center on the role of storytelling in shaping climate justice narrative in Africa. My guests are already here to help us converse this issue in the next around 40 minutes or so. To my extreme left, that is Kenneth Kigunda, who is a Climate Story Lab Africa Communications lead. Right next to him is Peter Mudamba, who is a program director, Docubox East Africa Film Fund. Karibu sana to the program, gentlemen.
Asante sana.
Let me just start with you, Ken. Climate Story Lab Africa reconvening the second time on the 29th of this month. Of course, just means that there was a first time.
Yep.
But talk to me about the purpose of this one-day event.
So Climate Story Lab Africa, it's a convening for storytellers, community frontliners, doers and dreamers, innovators, each and every person who feels like we need to have a conversation around Climate Story Lab, around climate change. And so we are coming for the second time just to try and have a conversation rather on what has been happening. Of course, we felt the effect of climate change in at a global scale, but as well at Kenya and Africa at large. And so it has for us now to start having those conversations, digging deep and interrogating what does this climate change really mean to us, and then what's the power of storytelling, and what role each and every person in Africa takes then to ensure we are mitigating the crisis of climate change. So that's why we are reconvening this time again. Last time we had in 2021, Climate Story Lab Africa happening in Nairobi, and we're so happy again to host it here. We had storytellers coming on board. These are illustrators, cartoonists. We also had community frontliners. We had filmmakers who have done impactful documentaries around climate change, and we also had policymakers in the same room having a conversation. And so that's how it's began. But maybe to take you back on how we start, how Climate Story Lab became.
Sure.
It was because of a farmer called Kisilu back in Mutomo in Kitui, which is northeastern, or rather eastern part of Kenya. And he began documenting extreme weather seasons that he was facing there. And he met this particular researcher who was coming from Norway. And that's when they shot a film called Thank You for the Rain. And that led up to where we are right now. So you see the power of storytelling. It can really generate a lot of conversations to a level that now we can have an entire continent coming and trying to see then how can we steer up our conversation, and how can we be heard about or rather add our voices about climate change.
Well said. I mean, in his opening remarks, Peter Ken has talked about quite a number of issues, the power and aspect of storytelling, dating us back to 2021, you know, when the first meeting was held, so to speak. But you're coming in as partners, Docubox Film. What exactly is your role, even as you're preparing for this upcoming event, and which key aspect are you playing in this whole idea?
Maybe the way to start this conversation would be to just, first of all, create for you the picture of the partners in the space, because then you understand why each partner comes in. So we have Climate Justice Resilience Fund, which rolled off all the stuff that Ken has talked about in terms of making sure a film like Thank You for the Rain went down to Mutomo for impact, and we shall be talking about what that is all about.
Yes.
We'll get away from heavy jargon and just talk about Mwananchi language, then people will understand better. Then there is the Doc Society. The Doc Society is our sister company in the UK, and what it does is it uses documentary as a powerful tool for change, and Docubox is the East African Documentary Film Fund. But apart from funding documentary filmmakers, we also look at ways in which we can be able to use story for change. And you will find different kinds of stories that we have actually been able to work with. There is a film, as an example, called The Letter, which was used, which is still being used at the coast to be able to change the narrative about our elders, because there has been an erosion of the place of the elders in society, and some of them are then branded witches and killed, and it is in the pretext of being branded witches so that they can be able to let go of their land and the like. And if you move away from the spot of the letter, then you go to a film like Thank You for the Rain, or you come to a film like The River of Brown Waters, which is a short film about the Ewasonyiro River. Then it starts moving from stories that could be commonplace into complex spaces, but then because you are watching, because you are looking at moving pictures and are able to decipher what's taking place, it becomes easier. So Docubox comes in with the power of the story to change the narrative. Doc Society supports. Climate Justice Resilience Fund comes in to help. Then there is Heinrich Ball Foundation, there is Saracen and the like, who have all come together so that this story of climate change can be broken down into a language which is palatable and easy for a guy, as I said, in Moranga, in Shamahoho, or in Rachuonyo, to understand without thinking about the big words that most likely you'll find scientists talking about. So there's a space for everyone, but now we come in with the central bit of what story can do. As storytellers, filmmakers, poets, visual artists, fashion, etc. And we'll talk about that. Yeah.
And we'll come back to that momentarily, even as we look at the impact that it has had so far in shifting the narrative. But coming back to you, Ken, as you said, this is the second time, of course, and as you've already alluded, that obviously there was a first time, that was last year. When you backtrack, looking at the first meeting or the first event that was held 1 year later, so to speak, because there's really quite a lot that is talked about when it comes to matters climate change. We've looked at so very many interventions that have also been proffered, some working, some quite not there. But looking back 1 year later, what has been the impact so far?
Well, if you look back from where we began, and I like the process that we've been through, because it's began with one farmer, then the conversation moved to COP21 in Bonn, and then moved to COP23, and that's how now, again, Kisilu, we came back and said, as opposed to having these conversations, really happen at the grass, or rather at the boardrooms and very big conventions, the UN conventions, the COPs, why can't we then have these negotiations, or rather this conversation? People come together and have that particular storytelling power and speak about climate change in a language that people will understand. So Climate 2021 happened, and we brought people together just to simply interrogate. We always hear this climate justice, but what does it mean to we as African? When we hear about climate financing, then what are these jargonistic words that most people at the grassroots will not understand? And that's why we brought someone like Mary Kuket in Baringo, doing a lot of gender issues and again climate change issues. We brought Magiro Power, John Magiro, who has again done a lot of hydropower, trying to connect people to the grid. We know that around 600 million Africans are not even connected to the power grid. So how do we then be able to mitigate that and get people get energy? So we brought these people in the conversations, trying to steer up to see what young people have done in terms of innovations around climate change and what they've been able to impact their society. Right now in Moranga, the small village that John is, they're able to connect to the power and energy and do a lot of industrial work. When you go to Kisilu, Mutomo, he's able now to do a lot of farming. In fact, they don't have to worry of trekking over kilometers to have their kettles now, get water or even pasture, because they're around there. They can grow some small pasture for the cattle. They can also do a little bit of kitchen farming and be able to sustain their families. Look at Makueni County and what we've seen from activists down there, community members pushing for policy. Now it's one of the counties that as a whole, climate climate change policy that actually gives 1%. We still believe there is room for more in terms of allocation, where people can be able now to get even 30% to just deal with the entire issue of climate change, because it's a crisis. So the conversation have moved, and as my colleague Mdas mentioned, Leisa, a lady from the Maasai community, actually Samburu in the northern eastern, was able to shoot a whole documentary about Ewasonyiro. We all know, when you did maybe geography a while back, you knew Ewasonyiro was a big river and served almost the entire northeastern part of Kenya. But now it's a seasonal river. Is it? I don't even know if it exists. At the moment, with the kind of extreme weathers we've had, there is no river Ewasonyiro, and the little that is left has been tapped by just a few, and down the stream, others are suffering. So how do we have conversation then to say, yes, there's this crisis that is happening, but how can we share the resources that are there then to be able to live in a better place? And it can never be told in any other language rather than storytelling. And that's why we see the power of people like, we really encourage more people to come on board. We thank Docubox is part of this, and encouraging more storytellers. We thank Doc Society is there, just to see how can we have policymakers who are at that level of COP27. Now we have our president, the former president rather, at the UN, and other people chairing climate change at that level. So how do we bring that conversation then back here home to have people feel it and people take action in the little way they can? Look at what's happening. If you are getting into Mombasa County, one of the second biggest county, you remember past Changamwe, there was a whole dump site. I mean, the first phase of Mombasa was a dump site. But now, when you go there, someone like Simba Cement took an action in their own way and built a park. Kids now have a place to go and relax, play. Big people have, elderly people can go sit down, have conversation there. Look at what is happening in Dandora again.
Yes.
There's a community who are taking action, and they said, actually, how can we reclaim this big part of land and make it a playing ground for our kids to be able to engage and play? And that's what kind of small actions we really want people to take. And it can be told through the power of storytelling.
But I also would like to pick it up from where Ken has left on the power of storytelling and bringing the conversation to the communities, and say that Climate Story Lab 2021 was also not just able to bring the conversations down to the grassroots. I think one of the major things was to bring the whole of Africa together to be able to start looking at climate justice and how we can mitigate the effects of climate change. And I'm saying this because during the conversation that happened, I think close to over 1 million people were streaming in and being able to follow the conversation. Now, what happens mostly, you'll find that these conversations will happen at the COPs. They would happen maybe in Paris, in Bonn, etc. And Africa usually is on the periphery, and nothing much is taking place. And as much as COP27 will be in Egypt this year, I think the important thing is conversations happening at different levels in Africa. And if it is led from Nairobi, and people are tuning in from West Africa, from South Africa, etc., like it's going to happen again in Climate Story Lab 2022, then the conversation becomes not a single story conversation, but it becomes a story that is being shared by everybody.
And everyone
then
is included.
At the same time, we move away from always talking about issues where we come in mostly as victims, but we come in with solutions. And I think story becomes a major space where we can bring into the space and say, here are the solutions. He talked about the president, and today I think President Ruto should be, whether it's today or during this week, at the UN General Assembly, and one of the issues that they're going to talk about is climate change. But if the politicians will carry the narrative, I'm not talking about President Ruto, but if politicians will carry the narrative the way they do at campaigns, asking questions such as mvua inatoka kwa miti ama inatoka binguni, that is the thing that storytellers must change. Because storytellers are genuine. They are serious about what they want to do, and they'll bring it to you live, and then at the end of the day, you look at how we can mitigate using stories that are there, you see, with one thing about, for example, documentary filmmaking, is that documentary filmmaking is factual storytelling. You are following facts. So you are given facts as they are, and then you deal with them as they are, and you can mitigate because you have the facts with you.
And I really like what both of you are saying, that indeed it's time for us to start thinking about the solution, because let's face it, it is a crisis. It is here with us. And even as you look at, conversations going around, is that it dates back from the 18th century and since the invention of the Industrial Revolution, and we have really blamed it so much as it came with its own positivities, but we've blamed it so much. But it's indeed time for us to start looking at solutions to actually curb and mitigate the issue that is climate change. But even as we are on that, I'd like you, Ken, to talk to me about the theme. What is the Africa climate justice narrative? That particular theme, what message is it putting forth?
Yes, one of the things that people, most Africans are asking, and especially there's a lady in Uganda who is running a whole campaign about loss and damages. And what she's asking is that Africa, yes, we are the victims. And we all know that Africa is not even the largest contributor of the pollution, or rather the damage that has happened to our climate. So how, as the victims who are facing, or rather facing the challenges that come with the impact of climate change, then do we get compensated for that? But apart from that, again, when we're asking about climate justice, we really have to move away from that nomenclature that we keep speaking about Africa being a victim. So what is the other side of the story? And that's what we are really bringing into Climate Story Lab Africa 2022. We just think, apart from being the victim, yes, it's true, we are the victims, but there's the other side of the story that is not usually told, that there are also Africans who are taking actions, who are doing little things to mitigate. And in fact, we feel like Africa is endowed with a lot of resources.
Yes.
If you look at, most minerals come from Africa.
Yes.
If you look at Africa is the most greenest part of the world. Look at the kind of ancestral history that we have around here. I mean, we have dating back in the 18th and whatever centuries that are there, only that our history has never been documented well, and it's about that time we document our stories, we tell them, so that other generations that are coming after us, they will learn from that. And we see most Africans, I mean, look, we have the largest young population on earth. What does that tell you? Then the youth can really take actions. The youth can really bring this conversation to the level that they understand. And what language that does most youth understand? We love music. Look at what Sandra, she's doing in Uganda. She sings about climate change. She does a lot of work with fashion, with resources that are there. Just to pass message. And she doesn't even have to go far. When she walks and meets a plastic, that's the same plastic she uses to do her own creation, the artifacts and the designs that she's doing. And she's doing a lot of amazing fashion installations, some of which we'll be showing at the Climate Story Lab Africa. You'll be amazed, there's a headphone, a monument that she has made out of the plastic and pollution, that littering that people have been doing in Uganda. And you can imagine Nairobi, you have a whole crisis. And I hope now that we have even the new governance in place, that they will also find such artists as Sandra and other ones here in Kenya who are doing amazing work and tap into those talents. Then how do we solve this climate crisis that is happening here on our own without even going far? How many people know that, for example, if you have onion, instead when you chop it, you usually throw away the roots and that small, the top, the smallest one. If you go and replant it, just for those who have some small spaces, Nairobi also, we have balcons, and you plant it at your balcony, you don't have to buy onions anymore, and you don't have to throw it away. You'll definitely be harvesting from your own small kitchen garden that you have there. So these conversations, we just have to churn them down to a level that common mwananchi understands. People, well, if you look at weather patterns, and now we usually expect July to be the coldest season. But now we're in September.
This has actually extended.
Yes, almost leading to October.
Yes.
We expect by this time we are receiving rains, and farmers have already prepared land and have done planting. But what's happening? We don't even know when we expect them. So it's about time we interrogate it, and the best way we can do, it's going back to...
In fact, the Met Department has already said that we should be expecting very depressed rains.
Yeah, they will not be enough. Look at what's happening in West Africa. There is, floods are happening all over. So it's about that time Africa has this conversation, because also we are starting to have those adverse effects on our side.
Well said. I mean, it's about time Africa starts to have that conversation. It's about time we take action. But equally, talk to us about the long-lasting impact of using this storytelling bit. I mean, I know you've talked about the thank you for the rain, you know, amongst the various hosts of different other documentaries that have been done so far. We are so much used to forums, talks, as you mentioned, conversation in very high-end, big places. But it's time we start exploring some of these new forms of interventions, like the storytelling.
It is indeed, because you see, what happens is that in those spaces where climate discussions happen, and again, they are legit, they are quite fine.
There's nothing wrong with it.
There's nothing wrong with it. But you can imagine for a short while that the discussion is being carried out, and the scientists are there, and the rest of the technocrats are listening in, and it's all about the glacier, about the Arctic and the melting down of snow and the like. That is happening. There's a real shift and there's a real change that's taking place, which is affecting everything that's taking place at the moment. But at the same time, the person whom I talked about on the ground wants just to understand why there has been a prolonged drought in northeastern Kenya, why the animals are all dying and people are in such dire straits. You see people feeding cattle with cartons. That's a sorry state to be in. And then, conversely, in other spaces, like I think part of Western Kenya recently, there was so much rain and Nyanza that there were floodings, and children cannot be able to go to school because the floods have come. And then the longer effect of climate justice or climate change happens in places like Bogoria or Nakuru, where waters are rising, and people are not understanding how come they are now moving away from their homes, and the floods have actually moved them away, and that is a phenomenon that's taking place. It is only story that can be able to capture this for posterity, because most of the times, let me use a bit of where I come from. I came from theater before. I used to be a theater artist. I used to be at the National Theater quite a bit, and I used to use performance for the sake of being able to change narrative and entertain at the same time. But then there comes a point where poetry is strong and it's really, really good, but there is a moment when you ask yourself, this theater piece, how long will it be able to serve? So as an example, Ngahi Kandenda is coming back to the National Theatre. It was there, I think, in May. It's coming back in October. If it doesn't happen again, it's gone and gone forever. Now look at film. Film captures that and puts it on a shelf and can be used for 50, 60 years, and you can always go back without a problem. So I contend that the moving image, being able to capture these stories in a film and the like, becomes one of the strongest ways to be able to use story to counter the narrative. But at the same time, being able to understand that through the medium of poetry or music, because for me, usually music is also poetry, sung, the moment that becomes the medium that is being used, everybody, from the young kid who's around 5 or 6 years, they are not scared of the big jargons. They listen to it. When Sandra Subi from Uganda sings and is done in her plastic whatever, people come and ask her questions straight on, and she's able to talk about why she's wearing the plastic clothes, which come from fossilized fuel, and why they are bad because they choke the animals as they go into the rivers, and why they are bad because they don't get decomposed and the like. And in a short while, that story is traveling quite fast. And in a short while, it's being tweeted about, people are listening to it and the like. Film remains on the shelf. Film can become a very strong educational piece. And we've always questioned why our education system has not seen the power of film and tapped into it. I hope somebody somewhere is listening, because I know for sure that the moment a film is in a space, even if it is shown here at KBC, millions of people are able to consume it, compared to
a long-lasting
and a wider reach coverage, and it goes beyond our borders to other spaces. So that's where we are at, and I believe that story, film, and storytellers are so central to most of the things that happen. In fact, I think for any calamity that has taken place, you'll always find that it is storytellers who elevated it to a point where people now understood the effects and the way to mitigate
and why it actually happened
and
in
why
the
it
first
happened
place.
in the first place.
Now, we talked about our president being in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and yes, we understand there's going to be a raft of issues discussed in terms of the speeches that are going to be relayed, key among them being the war in Ukraine, as well as the issues of climate change. But also I want you to talk to us about why Africa is potentially the strongest liberator of these issues, yet we are the least contributor. I mean, is that...
It's true. And if we look at Africa and the point that we are, all eyes are on us. And it's about time we really take pride of that and really take actions. Because if you look at the most places, a continent that has not been exploited as much is Africa. If you look at fossil fuel, well, we know some countries produce a lot, but again, Africa does not use it to the larger extent that other countries in the West really use it and utilize it. And we are at a point that we can mitigate that at that point and say, maybe, for example, why don't we use other alternative means of transport rather than those means that use fossil fuel? Since that we are known even for trekking, like I usually have this conversation when people are laughing about Bellevue and the Kamba people, and how we like trekking a lot, and take advantage of that and introduce other means of transportation and movement and so forth. So Africa, again, as the largest, I'm seeing that in the next couple of years we'll be at 2 billion. Our population will have increased with 2 billion people, and that's then and it's in between the age of 0 to 24 years, mostly taking the huge percentage of 50% of the population of that of the continent. So you can imagine having such a vibrant young nation, young people in such a continent, and what they can do. So why don't we even take up issues of innovation, that people can come with their own social impact innovations that can really help, to solve the whole issue of climate change within this particular. So it's true, Africa is bound with a lot of wealth. Either it's human resource, either it's things to do with the natural resources that we have, and we can overturn the entire climate conversation and climate impact to just make it a reality by using things that will not damage our earth.
All right, I hear you, and Rebecca is just screaming that we are really so much pinched for time. I didn't even realize. But I'd like to just sort of like conclude this conversation and get your headline thoughts in respect to basically what you're conversing and what to expect on the 29th, which is next week, Thursday. Okay.
Before I get to the headlines, I think something else I'll also add to what you said is Africa is a space where we have the opportunity to tap into solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, hydro, the green energy, compared to spaces like, for example, there's China, where a lot of the manufacturing and all that is happening with a lot of green. That's why I think the cloud in China, they say, is quite darker, and Africa has the opportunity of being able to salvage that by being able to go greener. In the programs that we are being able to give, we'll be talking about climate leadership. There will be the doers and dreamers, and climate leadership is being run by Heinrich Böll Foundation. Then there'll be Doers and Dreamers, which will be led by Saracen. We have the Power of Storytelling projects, which has a lot of fashion and the like, and that's where we are with Doc Society. And there is fossil and versus green energy. Ideally, it is breaking down the spaces where we'll have experts talking, but then story comes in and breaks it down in a manner that is able to be understood. And in Climate Story Lab, I want to believe we as Africa can be able to take lead in being able to mitigate the climate change and bring in climate justice in the space. And I want to thank all the partners that are coming into the space, plus all the people who have already registered. We have, I think, over 450 people who have already registered to be part of the conversation. There's a lot of interest in people who want to come and be part of be in the space itself, because it's a hybrid kind of conversation where some people will be in the space, but most of them will be online. Unfortunately, not many big numbers can be able to be in the space, so the hybrid place will be more important. So we urge people to register and get into the Climate Story Lab space, Climate Story Lab Africa, and they'll be able to have an opportunity to have their voice, and also to listen to what other, especially young Africans, are doing to mitigate climate change. And it's just a beautiful place, because one of the things I think I want to finish up with is there is a game which has been made, which talks about climate change, and it is centered about primary school kids. I wish most of you were able to tune in. Thank you so much.
We are really pressed for time, and we have to just bring it to a close at that point. I mean, there's really a lot we could talk about with respect to climate change, such a wide topic, but due to the interest of time, we have to end at that point. I have been speaking to Kenneth Kigunda to my extreme left, who's the Climate Story Lab Africa Communications Lead. Right next to him is Peter Mudamba, Program Director, Docubox East Africa Film Fund. And this is where we just come to a close in this conversation on matters climate change, and obviously also a good place to end Good Morning Kenya this Wednesday morning. Many thanks for watching. I'm Doreen Okello. Till tomorrow, have a good morning.